mental health at the workplace during COVID-19 outbreak, providing care for frontline workers. And so acknowledging all of you in the front line of this pandemic, and also providing care for those frontline workers inside the jails during the pandemic. So we've already looked at the outline and what you will gain from this webinar. So gaining knowledge about resilience and burnout, and being able to recognize signs and symptoms of stress. And what is really important is that we'll explore ideas on how to support and care for frontline workers, so that you'll be familiar with some practical exercises to manage stress and apply self-care. And hopefully we will discuss a bit in the end how to make an outline for an action plan to actually do some of these things in real life in your work. So the first part of the webinar will just look at understanding resilience and burnout, looking at signs and symptoms. And in the last part of the webinar, we'll be looking at how to respond to stress and facilitate staff care. So before we really start, I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a bit, because I would actually like you to do an exercise. So for this, you'd probably want to see me. So this exercise is called Tense and Release. So I'll take you through it now. And this is one of the things that you might do to manage your stress. So stress can feel different for different people. And for some, it might be having too many thoughts filling their heads. For others, it might feel very physical. And some might feel tension or even pain in their body. So it might feel like a string or a spring that's getting tighter, and this exercise might help you out to gradually uncoil the spring and be more relaxed and manage your stress and tension. So in this exercise, I'm going to ask you to tense your muscles and then notice when your muscles are tense and what it feels like when they are relaxed. So when I ask you to tense your muscles, just hold the tension for about 5 seconds and then let go and let the tension flow out of your muscles. So only tense your muscles to a point that feels comfortable. So it shouldn't feel painful, about half your strength. And I'll ask you just to sit comfortably, or if someone of you are standing, you can also stand, that's fine. But try to sit upright with your feet placed in the floor, both feet. And then you might close your eyes if you feel comfortable, or you can look straight ahead at a fixed spot. You can also look at me for the instructions. So now try to focus all of your attention on your forearms. So right on your forearms and your fists, try to focus your attention there. And now try to make fists with your hands. And while you're making these fists with your hands, you're tensing your muscles, and bring up the fists to your shoulders, so as if you are showing how big your muscles are. And really try to hold the tension here for a while. And notice how the tension feels. And fingers, fists, biceps, arms. And now let go of the tension and let your hands rest again in your lap, and feel how the tension is flowing out of your arms. Right. Now one more time. Fists. Show your muscles and really tense your muscles and hold the tension there. Looking good. And now let go again of the tension and just release and feel how it's flowing out of your arms and out through your hands. Now, I want you to focus your attention on your back and on your shoulders. So try now with the tension to lift up your shoulders all the way up to your ears, and then a little bit backwards. So you are connecting your shoulder blades on the back, and hold the tension just for a little longer and release, and then feel how the tension is just moving out through your arms. And one more time. And back, and hold the tension and let go again. And notice how it feels. Maybe it's a bit different now. Now, you can't see my feet, but what I want you to do now is to lift your heels from the ground. So focus your attention on your legs and your feet, and keep your toes in the ground, but lift up your heels and notice the tension. Hold the tension in your legs and your heels and your feet, and let go again. And just let the tension flow out of your legs. One more time, lift your heels. Feel the tension in your feet, in your calves, and maybe even your upper legs as well. And let go again of the tension. Now, the last thing, let's do it all at once. So, clench your fists, show your muscles, lift your shoulders up and back, and lift your heels from the floor, and hold the tension. Feel how it feels when your muscles are tense, and let go again. And relax and let all the tension flow out all the way down, and feel like a tree setting root to the floor. Notice how your breathing is maybe different, and maybe if you can feel a difference between being tense and being relaxed. All right, so very short exercise, and probably you would do this in a longer version if you are doing this with staff or with anyone feeling stressed. But I'm sure you get the idea now, and maybe you can feel as you exhale how you are a bit more relaxed. So I'll ask you now, for the ones of you who have some comments on how was this exercise. So you can use the chat now, the conversation, if you move on your screen. Let's see if anyone has a few comments on how did this exercise make you feel. Let's see if everyone managed to find the chat. Any comments in the chat room? How did this make you feel? How was this exercise? Maybe you'll, or maybe someone wants to share shortly.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Good and relaxing. Great. All right. So while you're trying to find the chat and maybe putting a few comments, I will start sharing my screen again with the presentation. Good. So hopefully you will now all see my screen again, and I'll ask my moderators in case there are any more comments, you can read them out loud. But I could see from the ones that I could see on the screen, it looked like you were releasing tension. So you got the idea of the exercise. Now, moving on. I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the role of the supervisors and line managers in staff care. So actually, when I think about supervisors, this could be line managers as well, but supervisors could also be psychologists. So I know a lot of psychologists from BJMP are also joining this webinar, as well as wardens and other staff. So your role is actually really important, because you can make the difference in promoting resilience and preventing burnout among staff. So some of your roles could be to ensure access to reliable information and resources, so that staff has these resources available. This could also be information about COVID-19. It could be enhancing a sense of belonging, so having regular team meetings with staff that really make them feel that they're in this together. It could be to talk openly about stress and psychosocial support. So try to encouraging staff to express feelings and concerns without fearing of any consequences when sharing these feelings. It could be to recognize and reach out to staff that may be in distress and link or refer them accordingly. So if they need additional support, then you would be able to tell them how to reach that support. It could also be to establish and promote stress management and self-care initiatives. And it could also be to provide supportive supervision. And we'll be talking a bit about this as we move on into the webinar. And I also just wanted to say that in this short webinar, it will mainly serve as an introduction and inspiration. So just as you're looking at these different things that you might do, this could serve as inspiration of what you might do in your own work to provide staff care. So as we move on, let's try first to take a step back and identify the basics of why staff might need staff care. So try to understand a bit about that. So let's first look at resilience. So here it says resilience is a person's ability to cope with challenges and difficulties and restore and maintain a new balance when the old one is challenged or destroyed. So it's often described as the ability to absorb shocks and bounce back. So what does this mean? This means that we have an ability, all of us, to cope even in adverse or harsh environment, including at our work. It doesn't mean that we can always cope. So even a person with great resilience might experience distress at some point in their life or in their work career. So I want you now just to take a second to think of one time in your life when you felt distressed. It could be in your work, it could be just in general, some point in time where you actually felt distressed. And now think about all the times you've actually managed to cope despite of the challenging situation. So there might be different situations where you're thinking of, or it may be even the situation right now with COVID-19 and all the challenges that you've actually been able to cope with. Great. Now, then let's look at what is burnout. So burnout is a chronic emotional exhaustion. So you might feel really exhausted, have low energy and impaired enthusiasm. You might have a lack of motivation to work. And sometimes people actually have a low work efficiency and are unable to complete tasks. And they might have a diminished sense of personal accomplishment and low self-esteem. They might even be pessimistic or cynical and have experienced mood swings. And this is sometimes also very visible for their colleagues or their managers. So this is really something that is affecting people if you get to the point where you burn out. And if we look at the different risks of burnout, this could somehow explain why someone might feel distressed or experience burnout at their workplace. So exposure to traumatic events and stories. So this means both working in an environment where traumatic events might happen, or just simply listening to stories about traumatic events can be a risk. It could also be unrealistic expectations and not prioritizing own needs. So that means if you are not prioritizing your sleep or your regular meals or taking time to rest. It could also be heroic aspirations. So that means maybe having a feeling that you want to save the world. And while we know it's actually probably not possible for one person to save the world, having these expectations might also make you feel more burned out or be a risk to burn out. Then we know that working conditions, such as your environment, the work hours, your workload, and these kinds of things also really affect the risk of burnout. There can also be organizational issues. So that could be the atmosphere at work, the boundaries of work and private life, or maybe even the lack of training for the work that you're doing. Those kinds of issues could also play a role and be a risk. And then there are personal issues. So we are all people going to work, and we also have a personal life. So if someone in our family got sick, if we were experiencing conflicts, or maybe if we've lost a loved one, that is also something that could play a role. Then, of course, use of unhelpful coping strategies. So, for instance, substance abuse, drinking too much, or isolating yourself. Something like this is also a risk to burnout, or can be a risk for sure. So these are all general risks, but now during the COVID pandemic, we know that there are also more specific risks or working conditions that can contribute to risk of burnout. So let's have a look at them. Probably you'll notice some of them, I think. So working overtime with inadequate time for rest and sleep, and in situations that are extremely demanding and not supported enough by the authorities, or without sufficient PPE, the personal protection, and infrastructure. So it's still a general thing that's happening during COVID-19 throughout all different countries that might affect your risk to burnout. And we also know that in several countries, the underline of experiencing a pandemic like this means that sometimes you get contradictory and confusing instructions, and they might change regularly. So this can also be quite stressful. At times, there might even be lack of food and other basic needs, and it might be difficult to access basic self-care, taking a shower, sleeping in your own bed, and stuff like this. People who are isolated from family and community also are at risk, or more at risk of burnout. We know that the working conditions in the COVID pandemic means that there is sometimes a lack of timely information and feedback on performance. And we all know that feedback on performance is something that we all need to be motivated in our work. So that's really important as well. Now, the pandemic and the COVID-19 imposes also fear for almost everyone working in the front line, fear of contracting COVID-19, but also to affecting or passing this on to their family and friends as a result of their work. And then we know from a lot of different countries that frontline workers experience stigmatization and discrimination from their community. So all of these working conditions are conditions that increases this risk of burnout when working in the front line. And now I want you just to have a look at a case, just to maybe increase the understanding of what this might look like in a person experiencing distress. So this is the case of jail officer Juan. This is of course made up, so it's not something, it's not an actual person. But let's have a look. So Juan works as a jail officer and is liked by his colleagues and the PDLs for his energy and positive attitude. Since the COVID-19 outbreak, Juan has been isolated inside the jail, and he hasn't been in contact with his family for the past month. Lately, Juan has felt exhausted and in a low mood. He's scared that he might get infected by the virus, and he keeps to himself. His colleagues noticed that he gets more easily upset and started expressing anger towards the PDLs. Juan has trouble sleeping, and he spends most nights worrying about his family at home. Lately, Juan has suffered from headaches and has had difficulties concentrating. He feels like he's going crazy, but he's scared to talk to anyone about how he feels. So now looking at this case, you may again use the chat. So what signs and symptoms of stress do you notice in Juan? So first, just have a look, think a bit about this case. What do you notice? And you can put down just a few words from the case of what it is that you notice about him being stressed. So someone is saying working environment and worries towards family and self. Very good. Other comments? Feeling exhausted, headaches, low mood, anger towards PDL. Yes. Great. So you're definitely noticing some things here. Difficulty concentrating. Yes, also a sign for sure. Trouble sleeping, spends most of the time worrying. Anxious that he might get infected. Yes. Trouble sleeping, worrying. Yeah, you can all see the chat, hopefully, so you can see all of these comments coming in. Very good recognition of signs and symptoms. So now try to now focus on what do you think might be helpful in Juan's case. So if you think just from the top of your head, what could be an idea or what could be something that might help Juan deal with this stress? It could be something he could do, or it could also be something that you might do, or any of his surroundings. So what might be helpful in Juan's case? It could probably be a range of different things. So I'm wondering, what do you think? All right, so someone is saying it would be nice for him to at least contact his family members through phone, any mode of communication. Yes, I agree. Listen. Yeah, so probably to have someone listen to his worries, that would also be helpful. Be open-minded and share to someone to talk to. Yes, yeah, so that could be good advice as well for him, or good ideas that might help him out. Stress management. Yes, great. Good. Good. And we'll be looking into this as we move on. Great. So you've mentioned a few signs and symptoms and ideas of how to support Juan now. And let's look at the next slide, because here I've listed a few signs and symptoms of stress. Probably you've all already mentioned some of them. And let's see if you can also recognize some of these signs and symptoms from the case. So physical symptoms such as headaches or sleep difficulties are very common symptoms of stress. It could also be behavior changes, maybe risk-taking, drinking too much alcohol or other substance abuse. It could be relational problems. It could be temper outbursts or withdrawing from colleagues, which you also saw in Juan's case. It could also be becoming less efficient at work or having difficulty concentrating, or developing a negative attitude towards the job or the organization or towards the beneficiaries themselves. So you saw also that in Juan's case, that he was getting more angry at the PDLs, maybe without really there being any reason, but simply because he feels more distressed, and this temper outbursts makes him feel more negative. But also the fear of maybe contracting COVID-19 might be a reason why he feels more negative in the attitude towards the PDLs. A lot of people also feel this emotional distress, such as continuous feelings of sadness. And then let's look at some of those specific things for being distressed in the COVID-19 pandemic. So we know from looking at the reactions in frontline workers around the world that a lot of people are really fear of getting sick and dying. And now this is actually a relevant fear, but of course something that can affect us in our work, especially as frontline workers. The fear of not being able to work, or for some people, the fear of getting fired, is also relevant in the COVID-19 pandemic, because for some people working in the front line as health workers, this could also be the case, or working in communities, poorer communities. It could be a risk to their economic situation. Then a lot of people feel quite helpless and might experience depressive symptoms, maybe due to that isolation that is imposed during the pandemic. Some people also feel a lot of mistrust and anger towards anyone associated with the disease. And in your case, in the Philippines, inside the jails, it could also be stigmatizations of PDLs and even colleagues because of this fear of contracting the virus. It could also be refusing to care for PDLs due to fear of contamination. A lot of people have increased emotional reactions. We mentioned that before, but it could be anger and aggression, and maybe even risk of violence due to stress. And this kind of violence or this anger could both be evident in the workplace, but it could also, some people also bring that home to their families. So in some places we see how violence is also increasing in the communities outside of the workplace. Then for people who might have mental health and substance use disorders, they might experience relapse. So even if they are well treated, they might experience a relapse during COVID-19 because of the stress. All right. And if you have any questions so far, you can just type them in the chat, and I'll let the moderators stop me in the presentation and then address some of the questions. But otherwise, let's move on to the second part of this webinar, because now we've looked at these different reactions and signs of symptoms. So we know, or we are familiar with some of the risks of burnout, and also familiar with the signs and symptoms, so we're able to recognize what might be distress in a staff member or in ourselves. So now in the next part, let's have a look at what it is that we can do to promote resilience and prevent burnout. So persons we know who are in quarantine actually cope better when they can make choices during their day. So if they have access to structured activities, if they have a routine, and if they receive information updates, that could be either text messages or a notice board with the information. We know that this is something that can actually help people who are in quarantine, either because of COVID-19 or because of restrictions, that this is something that can help them cope. We also know that promoting self-care and stress management can be helpful measures to prevent burnout in adverse situations. So still, self-care and stress management cannot eliminate issues related to, for instance, a challenging work environment, workload, and other things, but there are important things to consider to promote resilience for frontline workers. I just wanted to show you this. I know it's a very small font, so I'm not expecting you to read everything on this slide, but I've included it because this is from a study from monitoring needs among healthcare professionals. So you can also see the study in the references in the presentation later on. But the reason why this is interesting is because These are, of course, healthcare professionals, but they are frontline workers in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what the researchers found out was that there were 5 specific indicators that showed to be important when caring for frontline workers during COVID-19. And that was hear me, protect me, prepare me, support me, and care for me. So that means that we should consider action both before, during, and after a crisis such as COVID-19. So it's important to prepare frontline workers. So for instance, conducting trainings, and then it's important to support them during their work. And that could be staff care measures, self-care measures, and stress management. And then it's also important to ensure care after the pandemic or after the crisis, so maybe debriefing or relevant support. So in this webinar, we are discussing most about stress management and how to support staff in the middle of the crisis, in the middle of the pandemic. But just to also to underline that it's important to include staff in the way that we respond to their stress. So I'll go into a bit of this later, but the first point about hear me is that it's really important that we hear the voice from the frontline workers in deciding how it is that we'll respond. And that could be maybe monitoring their responses of what it is that they need. So having needs assessments done. But apart from that, it's really important to provide support for emotional and psychological needs during the pandemic. So also a little sum up of what I just said from this table. So there are a few points that are quite important in staff care. There are a lot of points, but here I've pointed out a few. So access to reliable information about COVID-19. So a lot of places, also in other places where I work, we've seen that a lot of people are affected by different rumors about COVID-19. And that means that they sometimes also have unrealistic fears about how to get in, to prevent yourself from getting infected and stuff like this. So access to reliable information is really important. Then assessment and monitoring could also be an important point to monitor levels of stress among staff, recognize their signs and symptoms of distress, and to assess their needs, like I said before. Then it's really important to make awareness. And I enjoyed the beginning of the presentation and the introduction where this was also underlined that mental health is really important. And that means that it's important to make staff aware about mental health, how to stay well, and where to seek support in case of need. Then it's important to provide supportive supervision and training. So it could be providing relevant psychosocial support such as psychological first aid that some of you might have heard about. Otherwise, there are also in the references, I'll make sure that the resource is there. And the reason why it's important to train people is that then people feel like they can actually do something. And providing psychological first aid could both be important for frontline workers to support the PDLs, but it could also be to support each other. And for someone who is like you, who are supervising frontline workers, it could also be important to provide psychosocial support to the staff. Then self-care and stress management strategies are really important to promote resilience and decrease levels of stress and risks of burnout. And that's what we'll really get into in this last part of the webinar. So let's first look at, before looking at the different types of support, when you are supporting staff, then there are different skills that are important. So of course, anyone can learn to manage basic helping or facilitation skills, but it's still relevant to maybe receive some training and to practice in these skills. So I'll just go through them quite briefly. So confidentiality, of course, is really important when facilitating staff care. And of course, depending on the type of support you are giving and the role that you have, this can be different. But having someone explaining about how they feel needs confidentiality, so that the people are able to actually explain how they feel and feel comfortable and safe doing this. So it's important to consider then the environment, for instance, when you're providing staff care. Where are you sitting when you're providing staff care? Or if you're doing it online, who else is listening in and stuff like this. Non-verbal communication is also important. So we all know that if someone is not paying attention to what we are saying, it doesn't feel nice to talk to them. So it could be eye contact, it could be the way you are sitting, or how you are actively listening and paying attention to what the other person is saying. It's also really important to have a non-judgmental attitude when you're providing care or facilitating staff care, so that the staff who might be expressing how they are feeling don't feel judged. So for instance, in the case, you remember Juan's case, that he was feeling like he was going crazy. Now, if someone was, if he actually was telling this to someone and they didn't take his feelings seriously, or if they started laughing, or if they said, "Oh, don't feel like that," that could feel for Juan a bit judgmental. So it's really important to stay curious and non-judgmental when providing care. And then it's very often we feel like we should provide advice or prompt solutions to someone's problems when they are expressing that they are feeling distressed. But actually, when facilitating care, it could be quite important not really to give advice, but really just to be curious and listen to how this person is feeling instead of prompting solutions. There could be different solutions that work differently for different people. So that's why one of these steps is not giving advice. It's also important to praise openness, so to thank the person who is expressing how they're feeling, to thank them about being open and wanting to talk to you about it so that they feel comfortable. And then communicating concern, so that could be saying, "I can hear how this must be difficult for you," or "that sounds challenging." So imposing some kind of empathy into the situation. Normalization about common reactions to stress is also important. And that could sound like this. So when being exposed to adversity and stress, such as working in the front line during COVID-19, it's common to experience a range of different emotions, like you just mentioned about, and then of course adding what this particular staff member was telling you about. It's also important to think about how you're asking questions. So staying curious, asking questions about how the staff might feel, and to consider when to ask closed questions, when to ask open questions, and still to make sure that the questions are phrased in a way that is non-judgmental. And then summarizing what you've heard this person say is also something that makes that other person feel heard and feel that you are actually listening to what they're saying. So this was very brief, and just letting you know that I've been training people in this several times, both community workers and psychologists and mental health professionals. So these are basic skills, and probably we all know them and we all use them, but it's still important to train yourself in these skills. Even myself, I'm also sometimes practicing these skills to be able to provide staff care. So let's move on to the different types of support. So this is what we'll be looking at in the next part of the webinar. So self-care, social support, peer support, supportive supervision, and then some exercises and resources how to manage stress. And these things can be done by a range of different paraprofessionals. So it could be lay helpers or it could be psychologists. So all of you who are listening in now, all of these things is also something you can do. It's still recommended, though, that there is a mental health professional or a trained social worker. It could also be someone who knows about how to provide this type of care that is supporting the activities. So let's look at self-care first. So these are all different ideas that you can use or you can promote to increase awareness about. So we know that staying active, that could be doing chores, or it could be doing pleasant activities like reading a book, listening to music, all kinds of different things of staying active is important in providing self-care for ourselves. It's also important to have a daily routine. So, for instance, we know that we need some sleep, we need meals regularly, and maybe even exercise. So, having this daily routine is really helpful in promoting self-care. Social support, I'll get back to that as well. But of course, having some sort of social support around you is really important. We are flock animals, human beings. So it's important for us not to isolate ourselves, but to have social support. And kinds of social support could also be religious practices or hope and faith practices. So that could also be important for you. Then to acknowledge feelings as common reaction. So this is really the attitude that someone has towards oneself. And that can be important. So instead of telling yourself that you are going crazy, I mean, this is something that you might feel, which is okay, but it could be really good to acknowledge feelings that this is actually a common reaction. So knowing, and this could be a way to promote awareness, so letting staff know that there are a range of different feelings that are common reactions in a crisis like COVID-19. Then setting achievable goals is quite important. So we were looking at before the risks of burnout, and one of them was to have too high expectations. We all know that if we have a workload, if we try to arrange ourselves in a way where we make smaller goals to achieve, it feels quite nice once you achieve those smaller goals. So that's also an important way of providing self-care. Then, of course, stress management exercises, which one of you also mentioned as what could be helpful in Juan's case. So we'll be looking into that a bit later as well. But first now, I want you actually to do another exercise. So this is where you will need your pen and paper. So you see here a drawing that I made. So I've drawn myself holding an umbrella. So this is what I want you to do now. So if you have a pen and paper ready, please try to make a drawing of yourself holding an umbrella. And usually when I do this exercise with frontline workers, we have quite a bit of time to do it. So this is just to get you an idea. So I'll go through it quite briefly. So I hope you don't feel frustrated if you don't make it all the way through the drawing, but you can continue after the webinar. So now, if you are holding yourself now, drawing yourself now holding the umbrella, I want you to imagine that that all the raindrops are stressors. So all the different raindrops are, it could be conflicts, it could be poor sleep, or I've also written family problems. So something that can make you feel distressed. And it's good to think about personal stressors. So not just copying the drawing from the slide, but thinking about what is it that can sometimes make me feel distressed. Great. And now, having put in some of these raindrops, now I want you to write inside the umbrella the things that protect you from the raindrops. So if you're thinking about the umbrella protecting you from the rain, the umbrella protecting you from the stressors. So what could be things, personal things that help you get through the rain or protect you from those stressors? And I've written here on the drawing, spending time with friends, prioritizing time to relax and sleep, and stuff like this. So you can, if some of you made the drawing already, you can, and you've turned on the camera, you can maybe show it to us. But otherwise, you can also you can also continue after the webinar to finish up the drawing. But nice work so far. Let's see. Great. All right. So hopefully you'll continue after the webinar with this drawing. And I want to mention that this is something that can be really good for frontline workers, but it can also be good for yourself. So I think it's helpful to have this drawing available. So in case I feel distressed, I can take it out and look at it. So it's actually an exercise that's also good for preparation. So to know what will help you out in case or when you might feel distressed. Then it serves as a reminder. All right. Good. So let's move on. Another thing that I mentioned of one of those topics of support was social support. So what you can do in terms of social support is to encourage staff to make their to strengthen their social support really, and you could encourage them to do different things. So social support could be to talk about experiences and feelings, even those that seem frightening or strange. So, you know, from one's case, the feeling like I'm going crazy. So that kind of feeling could also be important to share with colleagues or a trusted person. So, of course, it's important that they share these things with someone that they trust. Then it could also be to listen to what others say about how they are affected and how they cope. So listening to other people and how they are feeling can actually be a way of strengthening your own social support, because sometimes they share useful insights, maybe things that you want to try out that you hadn't thought about. And then to look after each other and promote peer support, that could also be quite important. So getting that sense of togetherness and promoting staff to care for each other, look after each other. And if they notice signs of distress, let there be an environment where they can support each other and help each other out, or link to relevant support. But social support is also, it doesn't have to mean that you are sharing difficulties or how you're feeling. It could also just be spending time together, even without talking. It could be playing a game, sharing a meal, just doing something together. And just like someone was mentioning as well, in the case of Juan, to stay connected to family and friends. So this is really, really important, as you might be isolated, to still, if possible, to have some means of contact to stay connected to family and friends. And then, of course, to use any other organizational support that might be available, but this could also be religious or spiritual support. So if someone might be religious, it could be praying, but it could also be other things. So this is just to use a few examples of how to utilize social support. And this could also serve as ideas of what you might do in your action plan later on. So some of these ideas could be something that you want to encourage staff to do more, or to help out making an environment where this is possible inside the jails. So even though I know that people have been isolated inside the jails for a very long time, there still might be things that they are able to do while being inside the jail and strengthening their social support. So it could also be together with colleagues. All right. Then peer support. That is a different. It's a different kind of social support, but it's somehow a bit more structured. So an idea could be to organize willing staff into a peer support team to reach out to other colleagues, maybe particularly new recruits, but just to raise awareness of available support and provide any assistance so that the staff feel safe and comfortable that someone is actually looking after them and taking care of them. And when you organize peer support groups, it's important to consider that they should be led by someone who's experienced and trained. It could be a semi-professional. It doesn't have to be, but it's relevant to consider their skills in providing peer support. And the reason why peer support can be helpful is that meeting in groups can actually decrease the fear of stigma about expressing emotions and seeking help. So being together with others who are also experiencing similar reactions, even though it might not take away those reactions or the feelings, simply knowing that someone else is feeling the same or a similar way can be helpful and can increase the sense of calm, that you are not the only one and probably you're not going crazy, but this is quite common. Then, as I said before, as managers or as wardens or line managers, it might be important to look at how to ensure, or if you're a psychologist, how to provide training on how to be an effective peer supporter. So it could be doing training on these communication skills that we were looking at before. Usually doing a lot of role play is a good way of training these communication skills. It could be training in psychological first aid, and also how to recognize signs and symptoms and how to refer any of those peers, so any of the colleagues who might feel severely distressed. So it's important that even those peer supporters are also being supported. And that also means that it's good to have someone provide regular supervision to the peer supporter. Good. So that was about peer support. Now, looking at the supportive supervision, this can be done usually by mental health professionals, but it could also be trained supervisors. And that means that wardens might also be, they might also provide supportive supervision. So this supportive supervision will promote skill development. So it could be sort of a training session as well, but listening to cases and doing joint problem solving, usually in groups, or a supportive two-way communication between the supervisor and the supervisees. So supportive supervision really promotes the well-being of staff because it improves their service delivery and it protects the people that they are working with. So, for instance, if you are providing psychosocial support, it's very important to have a supervisor to support you when things are difficult, or if you're seeing a difficult case and you need a bit of support on how to move on. And for this, there's a really relevant resource. So for anyone who might be providing supportive supervision, I very much encourage them to look at this resource that was made by IFRC. It's called Supportive Supervision During COVID-19. And you will see when you get the slides, the presentation, you will see in the resources I've provided a link to this resource. And maybe I can also send a PDF file. Now moving on to managing stress. So when we feel stressed, we tend to forget the coping strategies that we used to find helpful. So normally, a lot of us, we are used to experiencing stress and then to cope with it. That's the part of resilience that we were talking about before. But when we're stressed, we might forget about it. So when you're really distressed, probably some of these things you will realize as well, that the things you usually do to manage your stress, you tend to forget about it. You don't have time to do it, or you are so distressed that you don't remember what it is that you should do. So it might be really good to select a few simple exercises and instruct staff on what to do to manage their stress. So just like we were doing in the beginning of the webinar, you remember showing your muscles. So that could be one of those stress management exercises of what to do to manage your stress and tension. So what is always important when doing exercises like this is to start by providing what I would call psychoeducation, but just a bit of education of why it is that you're doing the exercise. Because just doing something without knowing why you're doing it might not be as helpful. So what you could say is that it's common to experience stress when exposed to adverse situations such as COVID-19. So that means that our fight and flight response is activated. So it's actually quite natural that we'll be able to run away really fast or fight back if we were in a dangerous situation. But sometimes when we're not in really dangerous situations, it can be quite painful to be in a stressed condition all the time, and you might feel tense. So it's important then to find ways to release a bit of that tension. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. So there are a lot of different exercises and ways to manage stress. And the core idea really is to help the body and mind to calm down. So this is what you've done already. You recognize the tense and release exercise that we did in the beginning. So this is one type of exercise that you can do. And I can also provide you with a resource of how to go through that exercise that we did in the beginning. Now, another thing that might be helpful to do is a slow breathing exercise. And now I'll just stop sharing my screen, because now I want to just do a short slow breathing exercise with you. So it might be helpful if you can see me. So I want you again to sit comfortably. Maybe you want to just move your shoulders a bit, and so that you're relaxed. Maybe you want to just slowly move your head from side to side, roll your shoulders, and place your feet in the ground if you're sitting. And then just sit as you're comfortable. And try then now to place your hands on the top of your stomach. So this is where you should be feeling your breathing. And I'll show you now, and then you can follow after. So hopefully you can see now that I'm holding my hands. And then what I'll do now is I'll try to breathe in through my nose, just as if I was smelling a flower. And then I'll breathe out through my mouth, like if I was blowing out a candle. So instead of breathing shallow, that's what we sometimes tend to do when we are stressed, and breathing up here. So this is sometimes not so helpful, but what is helpful is to try to focus to get our breathing down to our belly, so the belly breathing. So holding our hands on top of our belly, we should feel how our belly is expanding like a balloon when we're breathing in, and deflating when we're breathing out. So what I'll do now is to just breathe in through my nose and breathe out. And what might be helpful when you're instructing this is actually to start by breathing all air out. So let's try to do that together. So breathe all air out now. And then take a breath in. Great job. So now you're getting the belly breathing. And the next step of this exercise is to try to slow down the breathing. So when you get the idea of doing the breathing with your stomach, then try to see if you can slow down your breathing. You can do it in your own pace. Or if it's helpful, you might also count to 3. So you can breathe all air out. 1, 2, 3. And breathe all air in. 1, 2, 3. And out. 1, 2, 3. And in. 1, 2, 3. All right. How do you feel now? Do you feel anything in your body? You can provide information or comments in the chat. Someone is typing a heart. That's good, I think. And I could see some of you actually doing the exercise, so very well done. Good job. And some of you probably know it as well from before, but it might be good to be reminded of what can be helpful. Feeling a little bit relaxing. That's good. Great. Great. Relaxing. So it's working. And you might, if you're doing this exercise, you might do it for a bit longer. You might need more time to instruct participants in what to do and how to do it. So it's also common that it takes practice if you're not used to breathing like this. But this is an example. Now, another example that I wanted to do with you is to, it's kind of the similar, a bit of a breathing exercise. But for some people, they feel like there are a lot of thoughts that are filling their heads. And this is usually very true for staff care, for staff who are feeling distressed. So sometimes someone might tell you that they can't really focus breathing because they just have all of these thoughts that are entering their head and they can't focus. And so you might do this other exercise with them. You might tell them that it takes practice as well. So with practice of doing the breathing exercise, they'll be able eventually to manage. But what you can also do is if I'll do this short exercise with you again. So focus again on your breathing and sit comfortably. And you may close your eyes if you want to, if you feel comfortable. And now, as you're just sitting there breathing, you might notice that there are different thoughts that are entering your head. There might be lots of different disturbing thoughts. And I want you now to imagine that all of these thoughts are clouds on a sky. So some of your thoughts, some of those clouds, they might be big, they might be gray and full of rain. Some of them might be light. Some of them might flow by quickly with the wind, and others might slowly float on the sky. But while you are looking at your thoughts as clouds on the sky, just acknowledge that they are there, but try not to hold on to them. So while you're just sitting here and breathing, just try to imagine all of those thoughts that you might deal with later on. But for now, just let them be clouds on the sky and let them pass. Great. Good job. So now take another deep breath as the clouds are just floating around on the sky and passing on. And then slowly you can come back to the meeting room when you're ready. And if you have comments on how that felt, you can also type them in the chat. So this is just an example. There are a million of different examples that you might do to manage stress. So these were just a few of them. So we've done 3 ones now, the tense and release. and the slow breathing exercise, and also now the clouds on the sky. So hopefully you notice that that these very simple exercises can sometimes still be quite helpful. And knowing that staff who might feel very distressed have probably forgotten, even psychologists, even myself, sometimes if I feel stressed, I might forget what it is that is helpful for me to do. So in a pandemic like COVID-19, this is something that can be helpful for staff, that someone is reminding them and actually structuring what it is that could be helpful for them. All right, so I'll just go back to sharing the screen. So we did the slow breathing exercise and we've done the clouds on the sky exercise. Now, as I said, there are a lot of different resources where you can learn on how to manage your stress. And there are also in those resources a lot of different exercises. So while we've done a few just now that might give you ideas, it's still relevant to consider in staff care to provide relevant resources. And of course, it's important to consider that you're using reliable sources. It could be the World Health Organization, or there's also YASC who are providing different types of resources, or maybe even the Ministry of Health or BJMP. So these kinds of sources that are reliable. And then a really important point that has been very relevant to consider in this pandemic is that a lot of places, a lot of organizations has developed resources of, for instance, how to manage stress. And while this idea is really good, if you're providing all of the resources to the staff, they might be really overwhelmed. So as managers or as supervisors, it's important maybe just to pick one or two of these resources that you might provide to staff. And I've made 2 suggestions here, and you will also be able to find them in the resource slide when you get the copy of the slides with a link. So one is from YASC, and it's called Basic Psychosocial Skills. And this focus on learning to look after yourself and helping others. And it could be relevant for all kind of frontline staff. And it's very easy to go through. And the same is true for the WHO resource that is called Doing What Matters in Times of Stress. So this resource is really nice. It's a very simple language, and it includes illustrations of different exercises. So this is something that you could simply print out and make available for staff or even PDLs. And yeah, so it includes relevant exercises similar to the ones that we also did now to manage stress. So a last thing that's really important now that we've looked at all the different ways of providing support is that everyone knows the referral pathways for staff support. So while there are a lot of support that you might be able to provide, sometimes there will be staff who are severely distressed and who need additional or more specialized support. So in a few points, I think it's important to make it clear how staff can access further support. So is there, for instance, a phone number they can call, or how do they access this specialized support, such as a psychologist from the BJMP? It's also important to promote a culture where seeking support is not a taboo. So we know that almost in any workplace, seeking help can be really difficult for people. So staff might feel scared that they will be stigmatized, and therefore having a culture where this is that where this is not a taboo, but something that you as supervisors or managers are letting your staff know that this is a helpful thing to do. That's also really important. And then to communicate concern, so that means when we're looking at the skills before, so to acknowledge that the staff might be having different feelings, and simply maybe not necessarily doing anything about it right now when you're talking to them, but acknowledging that these are feelings that could be quite common in a crisis like this, and then to refer to more specialized support if you think this is something that I might not be able to handle myself, but will need maybe a psychologist or a psychiatrist to have a look at it. And this could be true for severe symptoms. So I know that some of you are psychologists, so you all probably know what I'm talking about, but just to mention, so severe symptoms could be substance abuse, drinking too much. It could be psychotic symptoms, which might be hearing or seeing things that are not there, or being severely confused. It could also, a symptom or a severe symptom could also be if someone hasn't been able to sleep for several days, and they're really getting severely distressed. And then, of course, self-harm and suicidal ideation is something that we also see even among staff who are distressed. So I want to mention this particularly because maybe many of us know that there is a fear sometimes that if you talk about suicide, then you might push that person to actually commit suicide. So I want to just underline that this is really a myth. So for most people, it is actually very relieving to have someone ask. So if they are experiencing suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts, it's actually for most people very relieving if someone is asking them about it and trying to help them out, to link them to support. So don't be scared of asking. That's I want to underline that. But of course, this is a case where you should refer to specialized support. Good. So we've reached the summary now of all our knowledge from this webinar. So I've tried to outline here a few points of what could be ideas. So there could be many different ideas of things that you might do to promote staff care, to provide staff care. And these are just a few considerations that came into my mind. So it might be relevant to develop or to adapt and distribute information, education, and communication materials. So this could be about COVID-19. So remembering information is important. But it could also just be mental health awareness messages or pictograms or something like this that could be available at the workplace. Another idea could be to train staff in COVID-19 sensitization messages to provide reliable information, because this increases calm and a sense of safety and trust. So this could also be done and be helpful both for staff and for the PDLs. Then it could be relevant to monitor levels of stress and mental health awareness among staff. So maybe doing a questionnaire or maybe a focus group, what do I know? But somehow to ask or to figure out the level of stress, or if the staff are feeling distressed, and if they know what mental health is, or how to stay healthy, also in terms of mental health. It could be relevant to train staff in basic psychosocial support, such as psychological first aid. So very basic support that could be relevant. Another idea would be to ensure regular supportive supervision or team meetings. So to create this sense of support and sense of togetherness in working during this pandemic. And then, of course, what we've been looking at now specifically also is to conduct activities to promote resilience. So that could be these stress management exercises that we've been looking into and other ways of promoting self-care. And of course, what we were also discussing was to establish peer support groups and to promote social support. So these are all a short summary of ideas of what you might be able to do to provide staff care inside the jails. So now, here you just to show you the list of resources, and you'll have them available when we send the presentation out to you. And you will see here that there are links for most parts, so the resources you'll be able to find online. And that leaves us with this exercise that I wanted you to do. So because of timing, we won't be able to do this complete exercise in the webinar. And it might also take you quite some time to really do an action plan outline. But what I want you to do now is to consider all of those things that we've been discussing now in the webinar. So all the knowledge that you have now about what are the risks of burnout, what are the signs and symptoms, and now what are all the different ideas of what can I do, how can I provide staff care, what is really my role, and how can I make sure that something practical is happening after this webinar. So maybe just a few seconds, brainstorm ideas of how to make use of the knowledge and exercises from the webinar. So what are the different ideas? Maybe there are several ones, and if you have a pen and paper, maybe write down a few ideas of what could be relevant. Maybe you're thinking about how to encourage staff to make use of the social support. Maybe you want to do stress management exercises, or to have some regular staff meetings where you're discussing things like this. Or maybe you even want to conduct a webinar similar to this one for the staff. Then when you've made that list of ideas, looking at what you could do, then I want you to select a specific idea. So knowing that we can't do everything at once, try to really focus on that one thing that you would like to do. So knowing that you play a really important role in providing care for the staff, what is the one thing that you would like to focus on now, that you would like to implement? So, for example, it could be conducting a training about staff self-care, or it could be implementing those stress management strategies or something like this. So once you've selected your one specific idea, then I want you to break down the idea into smaller steps to make an action plan of what it is that you need to do to actually implement this idea. So for instance, depending on your choice of idea, it could be a timeline of a week, or maybe even some of you have an idea you want to do immediately next week. But considering that I know you are probably very busy with other tasks as well, you could choose a timeline of a month. So if you think about 1 month, what are the different small steps that you need to do? Maybe it could be, if you wanted to conduct a webinar, you will need a bit of time to prepare. Maybe you'll need to get get an allowance, or be allowed to find time to conduct the webinar. So all of these small things, try to put them down in a timeline, and then consider when it is that you'll be able to provide this specific idea of staff care implemented. So what will be the timing of the meetings, or how will you encourage staff to do those exercises, or whatever it is that you chose to do. So if you have questions of how to do this action plan exercise, please type them in the chat. But I have a feeling that you get the sense of the exercise, so the action plan. And this now leaves us with the open forum. But let's just see. I'll stop sharing my screen now, and then I'll just